Well, it's no secret that I like my Amigas. In fact, in my collection to date, I have two 500s, two 1200s, the CD32 and the 2000. The one thing that's been missing though to finish off the wedge computers would be a 600. There's two of them. But of these, just this one is mine. I bought this from eBay a while back, spurs of repairs. It's missing a few keycaps, as you can see, and the case is missing a few screws. It has a couple of other problems, but we'll come back to that in a minute. This one over here though, this is owned by a viewer of mine, Brynjar Borgerson, and apologies if I'm mangling your name, but he sent me this looking it to be recapped. So hopefully this one will just be straightforward. This one definitely has a few issues, but the first thing I want to do here is we'll hook these up one at a time and we'll just run Amiga test kit to try and find out the full extent of any potential issues. So let's start with my one, but what was I ever thinking when I bought this? There are 5 keycaps missing, obviously a couple of screws missing. We're missing the trapdoor cover, number 2, color problem, so we'll take a look at that. All the ports seem to be intact, but that audio port, certainly that left audio port, is it just me or does that look a bit twisted? We'll find out better when we take them apart later on. You can see on this side that the case really just does not want to stick together. So I'll have to find some screws for it. And you mightn't be able to see it on the video, but I can see a bit of corrosion up in there just beside the mouse port. But let's hook it up and see if there's any sign of life. So let's power it up. Wow, there's a lot of noise coming through the audio there, so let me turn that down. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that picture looks fine. I don't see any color problems. Let's boot into Amiga test kit. May as well just start at the start. So memory test. Yeah, that seems okay. Keyboard. Well, we seem to have a few keys there that are not working, and a few other ones that seem to be a bit temperamental. So hopefully the membrane in here just needs a clean, or worst case scenario, we'll just have to get a new membrane, perhaps even a full new keyboard, because we're missing those keycaps. And I just noticed the caps lock LED is not working. Caps lock seems to be turning on as reported by Amiga test kit, but the LED doesn't. And because left alt isn't working, we can't get out of this test. So we can run floppy drive test. Let's just do a read test. So what about the controller ports? Mouse works, left, oh dear, no right. Let me just plug in a joystick. Just a 1-button joystick that, so I don't know if we could assume if that works or not. Let me swap these over actually. Or well, just put the mouse into the joystick port, because I wonder would the right hand mouse button register as button 2? No, it doesn't, but we'll test that theory when we move over to the other 600. Audio. No audio. Yep, there is nothing happening there at all. Oddly, the one thing that was written on the bottom of this, display issue, color problems, it looks fine to me. F6. Yeah, the color picture looks fine. I wonder, is there an issue over composite? Because we have it here at the minute over RGB. Just give me a second. And it's not producing a composite video signal. But swapping over to RGB again and the video looks fine. CIA and chipset test. Well, that's okay. Real-time clock, we don't have one installed. And I can't do the serial or parallel port tests as I don't have the required dongle. So quite a few issues on this machine. Other than the cosmetics, we have no sound, we have no right hand mouse button, and with no composite video. Now composite I'm not particularly worried about because, well, it'll only ever be connected over RGB as far as I'm concerned. But still, plenty to go through and investigate. What about this one? Cosmetically, this machine is at least in one piece. A little bit dirty. There's something very manky looking stuck between the keys there. Yeah. But other than that, it looks pretty straight. Ports look fine. The case isn't together properly at this end. Oh dear. Maybe the case has taken a knock in shipping. Looks like the little tabs that are inside here must be broken off, but I'm sure we can 3D print something to repair that. Let's test it out though. Okay, power on. What was that? That's a strange sounding disk drive. But let's go for Amiga test kit. Well, there's a problem. If it's not going to read the disk, we can't run the test kit. Time to grab the screwdrivers. So the 600 just has 4 screws. One there and then 3 along the front. Other than that, it's just clips, of which we know at least 1 or 2 of them must be broken. One thing I really do not like about the 600's design is the power running to the 3 LEDs here. It's sort of buried up in there, so that has to be disconnected before you can lift the keyboard away. Blue membrane keyboard. There were 2 variants of the keyboard on this machine, either blue or green. So we can disconnect that. And there is our disk drive, on which someone has stuck a label. 5th of February 21, tested and cleaned. Well, it's not working at the minute. Maybe it just needs another clean. There should be a screw at this point, just to secure the floppy drive down to the case, just there. There are 2 screws though that go through the back of the case, much like you'd have on the 1200 one disk drive. In fact, before we go any further, I got a new toy at Christmas. Finally got myself a ground strap. So let's put this on. Then we can go poking around inside our disk drive and take a closer look at the board. Now at least we shouldn't kill this thing if we go poking around with the finger. Shouldn't have any more possibility of electrostatic charge in me that could potentially damage anything. And I know this just connects to the ground in the wiring of the house, but there is something rather unnerving about plugging something in and then attaching it to your wrist. So just before we do jump inside this and try to give it a clean, I've just noticed something on the board here. Corrosion. Lots of nasty looking corrosion. It almost looks as if someone has sort of half-arsed attempted to clean some of this up, because you can see like lines in the dust here, like someone's went over it very quickly with a cotton bud or something. But that will definitely need some attention. The whole machine is going to get recapped, and I suppose since we now have this one apart, well, we may as well start with this one. Junebug, Amiga 600 revision 1.5. And that white corrosion, whatever it is fairly extensive. It's even damaged one of the pins on this component here. 74F258. One of the pins in that is black. Although considering the machine turned on, it posted to its kickstart. So, you know, it works to some extent anyway. So I think we are perhaps just catching this in the nick of time before any damage is caused. There's even a little bit of it on the underside. It's present there. There's a bit here, just round where there are various vias. I would assume whatever that corrosion is, it has came through those vias to stain the underside of the board. A little bit here as well. And over here. In fact, it is quite extensive over here. So the first thing that I want to do is try to clean all that up. I have a little bit of white vinegar here. Just going to get the toothbrush, dip that in the white vinegar, and then just go over all this corrosion. Try to get it off. Then once we've done that, we'll swap out to the IPA, because we need to get the vinegar off. In fact, the easiest way to do this is probably to hold the board upright and then just absolutely soak it, just to let the IPA run off it, which should take the vinegar with it. We just then need to dry it off, so we'll just start with a bit of kitchen roll. That'll just soak up the worst of it. Then, just to be sure that we have properly cleaned the areas where the corrosion was, I'm just going to go over them again with cotton bud, just while the board is still a bit damp. Right, that's the underside, nice and clean, but there are a few dull looking solder points which I just want to reflow, although I'll leave that until we have the soldering iron out later. I want to clean the top side, an awful lot of dust to get rid of first, so we'll just deal with that with the toothbrush. I'm trying to dry this a bit. And so with all that done, then it's just going to be the same thing again. White vinegar first of all. Just going to go over all this corrosion. Then it's going to be the IPA to get rid of the white vinegar. And then just drying it. Just the same way I did on the bottom side. Only difficulty on the top side really is with all these components and bits and pieces here. Drying it is a bit more labour intensive, shall we say. I'll need to use a fair few more of the cotton buds. I think the board turned out not too bad. All the corrosion seems to be away. That pin that was black has magically turned silver again. Although I think when we are doing the recap, we'll just reflow around that anyway, just to be sure. But you might notice I have the floppy drive in bits here. That's because I was just in the middle of giving it a clean. Now the heads in it, they are clean. And as you recall, someone had wrote on the top of the drive that it had been cleaned. The heads are cleaned. The rest of the disk drive though is kind of dirty. So since we have it in bits, I'm just going to get the worst of that dust out anyway. And we can even apply some new grease to the stepper motor and to the rail here. But perhaps the reason that this drive has failed has nothing to do with any dirt on the heads, but rather this is the same drive that was in that Amiga 1200 from a couple of months ago. And if you remember, that drive in that machine had failed and we were able to bring it back by replacing those 3 electrolytics. So there's every possibility that in this drive those 3 have failed as well. I do have some replacements, so we may as well just fit them while we have this apart. There's one of the capacitor locations there. Just want to put some new solder onto those points, and then hopefully just with a bit of wick we can remove everything. That one is 16 volt 22 UF. I'm going to replace it with a 25 volt part. I should have cut those legs down to size before soldering them on, because I've wound up with a big blob on one side, although it's easy fixed. So one floppy drive recapped. Unfortunately the only 100 UF caps I have are too tall to sit upright, so I'll have to sit on its side like that, but that's fine. I want to put the drive back together, then we'll reattach it to the 600's board here, power this up and see if we can finally launch Amiga test kit. Everything's hooked up that needs to be, that we can just try and run Amiga test kit. Power on. This drive didn't make that weird sound this time, so let's see if it wants to read a disk. Yeah, that's a bit better. Memory test. That seems fine. We obviously can't do the keyboard test because we don't have that hooked up at the minute. We can test our floppy drive. Let's just do the read test again. That's fine. Controller ports. Mouse left and right. Yep. That's fine. What about the joystick port? What do they do with joystick? So, left, right, down, up, fire. That's fine. In fact, just let me put the mouse into the joystick port, because I wanted to see if the right hand mouse button registered as joystick button 2, and it does. So definitely something wrong on that other board, as neither the right hand mouse button or the joystick second fire button, neither of those worked. Does this board play sounds? Yes. What about the video? It looks good. So let me try it over composite. I just want to be sure that we do have a composite problem on the other board, and it's not just me and some stupid setting or something that I don't have set right on my capture card. Maybe it is something on my capture card, because that's still saying no signal. Of course, it would help if the other end of that was plugged into the capture card. Yeah, okay. With that hooked up now, that is working. We are getting a composite signal out of this board. I wonder, is it just as stupid as last time? The wire here had got pulled out of the back of the computer and I didn't notice. That's why it was saying no signal. Just let me finish the last couple of tests that we can do, and then I want to plug the other board in just quickly to double check that composite thing. So video signal looks fine, or as well as it can, considering it is now over composite. All CIA tests are passed, and we don't have a real-time clock, and we can't do the serial and parallel one because I don't have the dongle. But it certainly seems as if this Amiga 600 is working fine. It just needs a recap, which we will do in a minute, but first just let me quickly check that composite from the other board. So I'm just sort of trying to balance this here above the other one that's on the mat. Composite is hooked up, and no video signal. But this one just needs a recap to get it finished, and indeed it would be nice to get this one finished first, then I could get it sent back to its rightful owner. So let's just do that. Now, last time I did a recap on an Amiga, it was that 1200, and I managed to melt the audio ports, the RGB port and the parallel port. Granted though, most of the damage was to the audio ports. So to just avoid any potential problems here, I'm going to desolder the keyboard connector. We'll desolder both of these I think with that all out of the way, we should be able to adequately protect the RGB and the parallel ports from the hot air. But we will also remove the IDE header, just because the base of that is plastic, and getting these caps off in the close vicinity, well, I don't want to risk damaging that. So 2 audio ports, keyboard header and IDE header. Time for the moo gun. Right, I have removed everything that I wanted to, but a couple of problems. It wouldn't be a CRG video if there weren't problems. The keyboard connector, that came off okay, as did that audio jack, but when it came to removing this one, unfortunately we lost part of a big ground trace here. Just at that position there was a bit of ground trace came down from that pad down this direction towards this capacitor, but that lifted off when the jack came away. Now I have checked it on the Amiga PCB Explorer, and that doesn't seem to actually go anywhere. So I'm hoping that won't actually be a problem. And if anything, it's underneath the jack, so you'll not see it. Certainly on this side of the board, there are no issues whatsoever. And continuity is still there on all those pads, as it should be. But the other issue, well, that arose when trying to remove this, the IDE connector. This thing did not want to come off. It put up quite the fight, and the stink of electrolytic when removing this, well, let's just say it was rather potent. So we have unfortunately lost part of a couple of pads here, although I have checked continuity from what remains through to its trace and wherever it goes, and that's all fine. Up here though, well, as you can see, we have completely lost that pad in that top right hand corner. So when it comes time to put the IDE header back on, we'll just have to expose some of the copper on that trace beside it and run a little patch wire across onto it. I don't actually know how that happened, because it's not like I was applying any force to it. It was just with using the desoldering station, it just disappeared. The pad, I presume, got sucked up inside the desoldering station. So whether it was just weakened from electrolytic, or I don't know, perhaps I was just being too heavy-handed. Maybe I had the heat up too high. But it's done now, so all we can do is fix it. At least that pad was only connected to that trace. If we look on the other side of the board, it's actually pin 1 where that damage is on the other side, and you can see that that pin 1, well, there's no traces connected to it on this side. But since we are desoldering stuff, I think what I'll do is just turn that machine back on again, and we will remove the 4 through-hole capacitors, and then it's going to be the turn of the hot air to get all the surface mounted stuff off. The through-hole caps, well, they came off with no problems whatsoever. Time to start into the surface mount ones and start with these 3. Now the pads around these do look a little corroded, to say the least. So before we just hit them with the hot air, I want to at least try to get a little bit of fresh solder into them. Oh my god, it absolutely stinks. Right, let's see if they'll come off. Well, at least they came off with no drama. Just quickly tidy up the pads. Then we can put the new ones on. Those 2 were 22s, that one was a 10. In fact, just give us a quick clean before we do put the new ones on. Now, just because of the orientation of these 2 in particular, I'm going to do this one first. So, as you know, the way I like to do this, just tin up one pad. In fact, give me a bit of flux. Then we'll grab the capacitor in tweezers remelt that bit of solder, offer this up, and that should be it. Just want to move it back on the pad a little bit. There, that's pretty good. And we'll just flow the other side of it. And just do the other two. Granted, the tip on this iron is a little bit big. I do have to order some new tips. Then last one. I just noticed that while doing that, I must have touched the solder on this component here, a resistor, R349. It's left it a bit untidy looking, so I'll just put a bit of flux onto that. And we'll reflow it again. There, that looks better. 3 down. We'll just work our way across the board, so I'll do that one next. Then it's going to be the nervous ones, really. Removing these two with the hot air. We're going to take some more precaution this time to make sure we do not melt the RGB or the parallel port. New capacitor fitted there, and I also just fitted that through-hole one while I was working in the area. But this is the plan to get these off without causing any damage to the port's tinfoil with the high temperature masking tape above it. Hopefully that will be enough to reflect any heat away from the plastic and stop it melting. Only one way to find out though. Let's try and get these off. Oh, my eyes are almost watering with the smell of this. Those two have leaked severely. But that's them off. Go away. And I suppose time for the moment of truth. Did anything melt? That one looks fine. And again, that's fine. So that seems to do the trick. A little bit of tin foil saves any potential damage. Just going to leave that bit of tape there, just over where the keyboard connector is, just so that I don't block any of those holes when fitting the new capacitors. Those two are both 22s, aren't they? Yep. They were originally 25 volt parts, but I'm replacing them here with 35 volt parts. The voltage can be higher, it's just the capacitance value that needs to be the same. One thing I find a little bit interesting here is that the silk screen with the marking of the capacitor is just shown as a rectangle. Well, for those two anyway it is, and it was the same for some of the other ones up here. But typically the positive side, which is marked here, plus, typically the positive side would be shown as like a chamfered outline, the same way that the actual component itself is. And I notice on the Amiga PCB Explorer, it is shown with a chamfered outline. Granted, on the PCB Explorer, it's a revision 2 motherboard. This is a revision 1.5. I wonder on the real Amiga 600 revision 2, is the silk screen different? Is the outline of these shown correctly? Right, those two are on, but just before we leave this area, they had leaked quite badly. And these couple of components here just adjacent to them, a couple of resistors, and I think that's a transistor, but the pads on them do not look great. Just want to hit them gently with a fiberglass pen, and I just want to reflow them. You may think yourself pointless exercise, and it probably is, considering we know this machine works okay, but I'm just not happy leaving them the way they were. Just looks that little bit better. I'll stick the audio jacks and the keyboard connector back on, then it's just to tackle this area. I'm not going to bore you with changing out these capacitors, it's just the same story again. Hot air to remove the old caps, clean it up with a bit of solder wick, and then just stick the new ones on. Well, we're certainly getting there, but we have run into another problem, and that's because I've ran out of the 100s. I need another 2 of them to go here and here. I thought I had loads, and in fact I do have plenty of these ones, but as you can see, these ones are way too big. So I've ordered more. They'll be here in a couple of days, and we'll finish it off at that point. You'll notice I removed the RF modulator. I did that just to be able to access this side of those 3 caps. There's a 470 to go in there, this thing. But again, I can't really fit that yet because it's going to block access to that pad there. I also had this filter out just to allow me to fit the 2 47s at this point. But we can go ahead, I think, and fit the IDE port. So let's do that. When I was desoldering it, I put this small ribbon cable on it just to help hold it together. So that will go back in there. Use a little bit of blue tack just to help hold it. I'll solder up all the pins I can, and then we need to take a closer look at this one to try and make the repair. So how are we going to fix this? Well, the first thing I need to do is expose some of the copper on this trace beside it. I'm going to try and use a bit of this very fine wrapping wire. So we'll just strip a section of it like that. We'll attach it to the pin and then just try and bring it down and attach it onto that trace. Okay, that's it attached to the pin. And hopefully that is it attached to the trace. Yep, seems to be. Then we just should be able to nip it off with the knife. I'll just put a little bit of nail polish over all that, just to help protect it. But that should be it fixed. If you remember, this corner of it wasn't being held closed properly. And that's because the clip here, here and here is broken off. In fact, the clip in this position, which mirrors this one, that is also broken off, but I suppose that one isn't as critical because there is a screw just beside it. But I think we'll just try and fix the 4 of them anyway. So having a look on Thingiverse, I found these. Yes, I have printed them in black because black just so happened to be the colour of filament I have in my printer at the minute. So these ones will replace those things at the back. These ones will replace these bits, but as you can probably guess, I need to remove what is left of the old ones. And so to get those off, it's just going to be the knife. And we're just slowly going to cut the plastic and hopefully not damage the rest of the case. In fact, I've got an idea. If we heat this up with a lighter, it should cut through the plastic a bit easier without putting as much stress on it. And do not try this at home, kids. I am a trained idiot. Yeah, I think that worked okay. I can file it down a wee bit just to get it perfectly flat. But we'll just do the same with the other ones. Remove what we can. That's just the super glue I'm using, but it should be more than strong enough. Then we'll stick on the bits at the side. Just remembering that these are keyed. You know, there's a left side and a right side. If anyone needs new clips for their Amiga 600, I will leave links to the Thingiverse articles from where I downloaded these. These side ones here were actually created by Mr. Lurch, the Australian YouTuber. He came up with these when repairing his Amiga 600. Now, super glue does dry really quick, but it does say on the back of that bottle to allow up to 24 hours for it to fully cure. It isn't the warmest in here this time of year, So we will just leave this until tomorrow before we even attempt putting it back together. And the other 2 capacitors I needed, those have arrived. So let's get those on. That'll be the board finished. In fact, that's everything finished, isn't it? Just be a matter of putting it all back together and testing. Just before assembly then, there are a couple of wee bits of rust on this bottom shield. So I'm just going to go over them gently with the fiberglass pen. It is only surface rust. There's some of it there, for example. And you can see it soon comes off with the fiberglass pen. And just a bit of kitchen roll soaked in IPA. And that just cleans the area after we're done. And yeah, you get the idea anyway. So I'll continue doing all that and then put it all back together and we'll give it one last test. Just in the middle of reassembly and we've got a problem. This is getting in the way of the floppy drive. As you can see, so I have little choice but to cut away part of this support section here at the back. It's the only way the floppy drive will go down in. Just trying to eyeball it there. I think it needs cut at about that point. I wound up having to cut quite a bit of that away in order to get the floppy drive to fit, but it does now fit. Let's just be sure it won't interfere with the disk. I don't think it will, but we'll just check. And no, that's fine. So I can only assume that Mr. Lurch, when he designed these, perhaps his floppy drive was a bit different. But on with the assembly. The keyboard keeps popping out of the clips at the back. That is the worst design I think I've seen in any Amiga. Just 2 wee tiny clips hold in the whole keyboard. So I've put those couple of bits of tape over it just to help hopefully hold it in position. And of course the sticker, full recap December 22. Well, all back together. I will give it a bit of a clean before sending it back to its rightful owner, but let's give it one last test. We do need to test this keyboard after all. So still powers up, that's a good thing. And the floppy drive still seems to work. What about the keyboard? Yeah, it's all fine. Caps lock key working, or the LED working. Yep, that's okay. Audio still work. Yep, sounds fine to me. And so yeah, 1 down, 1 to go. Well, 1 down and 1 to go. But I think we will leave this mess of an Amiga 600 until next time. This one is done. We did run into a couple of problems along the way. Suppose I really caused those problems, didn't I? Causing that wee bit of damage, especially to the IDE port. And I'm sure the fact that I did that will raise the question again of how you're meant to actually remove those old capacitors. I use hot air. And so I like to get those bits of plastic on the likes of that IDE connector, like to get those out of the way to save any chance of melting them. Now I know plenty of other people twist them off or cut them off, and I'm not going to say that that's the wrong way to do it. All I'm going to say is it's not the way that I like to do it. You can also use 2 irons to remove them, but again, to be honest with you, I'm just not that comfortable doing it that way. The only time I have ever lost a pad when removing old capacitors was using 2 irons. So I just like to use my hot air. You can remove capacitors any way you like, and I am very aware of all the other YouTubers that cut them off and twist them off. But look, it's done. It's all part of the learning experience. I've never claimed to be an expert at this, far from it. I just enjoy tinkering in these old machines. So yes, while I did agree to do this for someone else, That was really just on the basis of trying to help someone else within the community that needed their Amiga looking at. I haven't charged for doing this other than asking them to cover postage, but that's also not to say that everyone can send me their Amigas to get recapped. I do think going forward I have more than enough projects in here to keep me busy on the channel. I don't want this to turn into an Amiga repair channel. So going forward, if anyone is really stuck, I will try to help you out if I can. But there are professional services within the UK that will do your recap for you. And it would be those that I would have to recommend for anyone who doesn't feel comfortable doing it themselves. But that's it for now. This one's done. We still need to fix this one. I'm sure it's going to be all of the fun, that one, considering the faults that it's got. But as I said, we will leave that until next time. See you then.